She left home for work like any other morning, but she never came back. When Patrice Andrews vanished from her salon, investigators uncovered a mystery with strange clues, missing evidence, and countless unanswered questions. Explore the chilling timeline of this unforgettable true crime case.
Stay with us until the very end, because every clue matters. Before we begin, if you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our latest true crime stories.
In April 2004, Patrice Andrews seemed to have everything she had worked so hard to build. She owned a successful hair salon just outside Atlanta, Georgia. Her clients adored her. Her friends respected her. And nothing mattered more to her than her 16-year-old son, Pistol. The two shared an unusually close bond. Like any mother and teenage son, they had their occasional disagreements. In fact, they argued on the very morning Patrice disappeared. Pistol wanted to leave for school early to spend time with his girlfriend. Patrice wasn't thrilled about it, but just as quickly as the disagreement began, it ended. They told each other, "I love you," and went on with their day. Neither of them could have imagined it would be the last time they would ever speak. Patrice's life hadn't always been easy. Years earlier, she had struggled through difficult relationships and personal challenges. But after becoming a mother, everything changed. She turned her life around, went back to school, earned her cosmetology license, and dedicated herself to building a better future for her son. Eventually, with the support of her husband, Rob Andrews, she opened her own business, Tamber's Trim and Tan. The salon quickly became more than just a place to get a haircut. It became part of the community. Customers often stayed long after their appointments simply to chat with Patrice. Friends stopped by just to say hello. She wasn't just known as a talented hairstylist. She was known as someone who genuinely cared about people. One young customer later remembered how Patrice reopened the salon late one evening just to fix a disastrous at-home hair coloring mistake before senior pictures. Acts of kindness like that weren't unusual for Patrice. They were simply part of who she was. Even on her day off each week, she wasn't resting. Instead, she volunteered at a nearby nursing home, styling residents' hair and brightening their day. She had built a life around helping others. No one could understand why someone like Patrice would suddenly disappear without a trace. Thursday, April 15th, 2004. For Patrice, it should have been just another workday. Appointments were scheduled. Clients were expected. Business was supposed to continue as usual. But when one customer arrived for her appointment, something immediately felt wrong. The salon was unlocked. Patrice was nowhere to be found. Concerned, the client called police. When deputies arrived, they found a scene that raised more questions than answers. There were no signs of a violent struggle, no broken furniture, no obvious blood. Nothing suggested someone had been attacked. Yet something clearly wasn't right. The cash drawer was open and empty. Patrice's purse had been searched. But strangely, her wallet, her credit cards, and even hidden cash remained untouched. Investigators quickly realized robbery probably wasn't the motive. Then they noticed something else. Patrice's lunch had just been heated. It was still warm. Her car keys were sitting inside the salon. And outside, her black Chevy Tahoe wasn't parked where she always left it. Someone had moved it. But why? That single question would become one of the first mysteries investigators struggled to answer. Investigators had narrowed the timeline down to a matter of minutes. Patrice's first appointment that morning was with Pam Shepard, who arrived around 9 a.m. later. Pam told detectives something that immediately stood out. Patrice wasn't acting like herself. Normally, she was warm, cheerful, and completely focused on her clients. But that morning, she seemed distracted, almost as if something was weighing heavily on her mind. Pam left the salon just after 11 a.m. Only a few minutes later, another customer, Paul Canner, arrived for a haircut. Investigators were able to pinpoint exactly when he left because he received a phone call as he was walking out. The time was 11:27 a.m. Then came a small but critical gap. For the next 8 minutes, no one knows exactly what happened. Police believe Patrice likely began preparing for lunch during that time. At 11:35 a.m., another customer called to reschedule an appointment. Once again, something seemed unusual. The caller later told detectives Patrice sounded rushed, almost impatient, completely unlike the friendly woman everyone knew. The conversation ended around 11:37 a.m., then silence. At 11:50 a.m., another phone call came into the salon. This time, no one answered. That missing 13-minute window from 11:37 until 11:50 has become one of the most important mysteries in the entire investigation. Detectives believed those were the final moments before Patrice disappeared. Those 13 minutes would eventually inspire the title of the Unsolved Mysteries episode dedicated to her case. Over the years, investigators have kept many details confidential, but the documentary offered the public a closer look at the people who were closest to Patrice, and one relationship, in particular, quickly drew attention. Years before Patrice disappeared, she met Rob Andrews while working as a hairstylist. Rob was 20 years older than Patrice. According to him, the very first time he saw her, he believed she would one day become his wife. Eventually, they married. From the outside, they looked like a happy couple. Photographs showed smiles, hugs, a picture-perfect life. But according to those closest to the family, the reality behind closed doors was very different. Patrice's teenage son, Pistol, later described Rob as someone who initially tried to be a caring stepfather. But over time, everything changed. Pistol claimed Rob became increasingly hostile. He allegedly made cruel remarks and often treated him like an unwanted guest in his own home. Friends who visited the house reportedly witnessed the uncomfortable tension themselves. Pistol believed Rob resented the close relationship between mother and son. In his eyes, any attention Patrice gave to Pistol meant less attention for him. Rob, however, viewed the situation differently. He believed Patrice was too protective of her son and failed to discipline him. The conflict became so severe that family vacations rarely included all three of them together. Usually, Patrice spent time with Pistol while Rob stayed home, or Rob went somewhere without them. Just weeks before she disappeared, Pistol says his mother confided something deeply personal. She was planning to divorce Rob. When Rob was later asked about those claims, he insisted he had no idea Patrice wanted to end the marriage. But investigators and viewers alike found something else far more unsettling. Within 24 hours of Patrice vanishing, Rob changed every lock on the family home. Pistol wasn't even allowed inside to collect his clothes or personal belongings. If Patrice had somehow returned home, she wouldn't have been able to get inside. At the time, she hadn't even been missing for a full day. Pistol eventually moved in with his biological father. Rob later admitted changing the locks. At first, he claimed it was because of work and safety concerns. Later, during an interview, he gave another explanation. He simply didn't want Pistol in the house. When asked why, he paused before saying, "Because I didn't like him." He even described Pistol's presence as a burden on his mental well-being. Many people found Rob's behavior difficult to understand, especially since Patrice had disappeared from her salon, not from their home. Still, despite the family's suspicions and Rob's unusual actions, investigators interviewed everyone close to Patrice. By the end of April, authorities announced they had found no evidence linking her family or close friends to her disappearance. For the moment, Rob was no longer considered a suspect, but detectives were about to turn their attention towards someone with a far darker past. As the search for Patrice continued, another name began appearing in the investigation: Jeremy Bryan Jones. Jones was a drifter who traveled throughout the southeastern United States, taking temporary construction jobs wherever he could find work. But wherever he went, trouble seemed to follow. People who knew him described two completely different versions of the same man. His girlfriend painted the picture of someone caring and gentle. Neighbors told a very different story. They described him as unpredictable, paranoid, and heavily involved with methamphetamine. By late 2004, Jeremy Jones had already been arrested in Alabama in connection with a murder investigation. Soon afterward, he was linked to another killing in Georgia. Investigators realized something alarming. One of the places Jones had lived was only about 70 miles from Patrice's salon, close enough to make the drive in well under 2 hours. As the months passed, Patrice's case had gone cold. Thousands of dollars in reward money produced no major leads. Missing person posters slowly disappeared from store windows. Hope was fading. Then Jeremy Jones entered the spotlight. With multiple murder investigations surrounding him, detectives wondered whether Patrice's disappearance might be connected to a serial predator already operating across the region. The question now was simple. Had investigators finally found the man responsible, or were they chasing another dead end? As the investigation dragged on with few solid leads, detectives turned their attention to a man already linked to multiple violent crimes across the Southeast. His name was Jeremy Bryan Jones. In January 2005, Jones made a stunning claim. He confessed to kidnapping and killing Patrice Andrews. According to his statement, he had been driving around while high on methamphetamine when he became lost. He said he stopped at Patrice's salon to ask for directions and help starting his vehicle. But what happened next was far more disturbing. Jones claimed he pulled a knife, forced Patrice into his car, and later disposed of her body by throwing it from a bridge into Sweetwater Creek. Investigators immediately searched the area. Cadaver dogs alerted twice near the creek. For a moment, it seemed they were finally getting closer to the truth. But despite an extensive search, no remains, no physical evidence, and no DNA were ever recovered. Authorities believed that if Patrice's body had ever been there, years of flowing water could have washed away any trace. Sheriff Roger Paxton admitted Jones revealed details that had never been released publicly. Information, he said, that to some extent only the killer would know. But there was a problem. Those details couldn't be independently verified. And under Georgia law, a confession alone isn't enough to secure a conviction. Detectives still needed evidence to support Jones' story. Without it, his confession remained just another lead. Some investigators believed Jones was telling the truth. Others weren't so sure. His own attorney dismissed the confession entirely. He claimed Jones enjoyed the attention and would admit to almost anything if it meant spending hours talking to investigators, receiving good meals, and staying in the spotlight. Even footage later shown in Unsolved Mysteries captured Jones casually confessing to multiple crimes while sitting comfortably at a table covered with food. It raised an unsettling question. Was he revealing the truth? Or simply manipulating everyone listening? Just when investigators hoped the case was finally moving forward, another setback hit. The witness who claimed to have seen a suspicious man in a white van near Patrice's salon had fabricated the entire story. Months of investigative work, dozens of tips, and countless hours reviewing surveillance footage had all been based on information that simply wasn't true. Authorities later charged the woman with making false statements during the investigation. But the damage had already been done. The fake lead had diverted valuable time and resources away from the real investigation. Then another revelation stunned law enforcement. The FBI acknowledged that its fingerprint identification system had made a serious error. Jeremy Jones had repeatedly avoided detection by using the identity of another man already serving time in prison. Instead of connecting Jones' fingerprints to his criminal history, the system mistakenly created an entirely new profile with no prior offenses. As a result, Jones was released after several arrests when he should have been identified immediately. Investigators later acknowledged that if the system had worked correctly, Jones might have been taken off the streets much sooner. If he truly was responsible for Patrice's disappearance, that mistake may have had devastating consequences. Later that year, Jones was convicted of murdering Lisa Nichols in Alabama. By then, many investigators believed Patrice had likely become another one of his victims. Her husband, Rob, even attended part of Jones' murder trial, hoping to find some sense of closure. But despite Jones' confession, the mystery surrounding Patrice remained unsolved. Then, everything changed. Exactly 600 days after Patrice vanished, the investigation took a heartbreaking turn. Near Lebanon Baptist Church in Dawson County, a father and son were working outside when they noticed vultures circling deep in the woods. Curious, they walked toward the area. At first, they believed the birds were feeding on a dead deer. But as they prepared to leave, they noticed something far more disturbing: a human skull. Authorities rushed to the scene. Dental records soon confirmed the unimaginable. The remains belonged to Patrice Andrews. After nearly 2 years, she had finally been found. Investigators searched the surrounding area and recovered additional bones over the following days. But many important pieces were still missing. There was no clothing, no jewelry, no weapon. And one item stood out above all the others. Patrice's wedding ring had completely disappeared. Even after finding her remains, investigators were left with more questions than answers. How had her body ended up there? Who moved her? And what really happened during those mysterious 13 minutes inside her salon? The discovery brought Patrice home, but it did not bring her family the answers they had spent years searching for. When investigators finally recovered Patrice's remains, they hoped the discovery would answer the questions that had haunted the case for nearly 2 years. Instead, it created even more. Because of the condition of the remains, medical examiners couldn't determine exactly how Patrice had died. Authorities classified the case as a homicide, but the precise cause of death has never been made public. Then detectives focused on something else: the location. Patrice's remains weren't found near a road. There was no hiking trail nearby, no easy way in or out. Whoever left her there would have had to carry her deep into the wooded area. That raised an unsettling possibility. Had someone transported her body there? Or had she somehow walked into those woods herself? Another major problem quickly emerged. The location didn't match Jeremy Jones' confession at all. Jones had claimed he dumped Patrice's body in Sweetwater Creek in Douglas County. But Patrice's remains were actually discovered in Dawson County, nearly 90 minutes away from the place Jones described. The confession no longer made sense. Even so, Sheriff Roger Paxton initially refused to eliminate Jones as a suspect. He maintained that Jones had shared details supposedly known only to the killer. But as time passed, that confidence began to fade. Later reports revealed that nearly everything Jones described had already been reported by the media or could have been guessed from publicly available information. Many investigators came to believe his confession wasn't an admission of guilt. It was simply another attempt to gain attention and better treatment while behind bars. Patrice's sister, Pistol's aunt Kylan Kramer, never believed Jones was responsible. She said his story never matched what the family had learned during the investigation. Even another sheriff openly questioned Jones' claims. If Jones truly committed the crime, why would he confuse two completely different counties separated by nearly 90 miles? Only days after Patrice's remains were identified, Jeremy Jones admitted the truth. He had lied. His confession, he said, had been completely fabricated. Still, investigators weren't ready to dismiss him entirely. Some wondered whether his confession was false, or whether his recantation was the real lie. With a man like Jeremy Jones, separating fact from fiction seemed almost impossible. Years later, another notorious criminal briefly entered the investigation. His name was Gary Michael Hilton. Hilton was already serving time after murdering several victims whose bodies were discovered in national forests across the southeastern United States. One of those victims had been found only about 10 miles from where Patrice's remains were recovered. That coincidence immediately caught investigators' attention. Could Hilton have been responsible for Patrice's murder as well? There were a few similarities. He had spent time in the area. He once admitted that he liked visiting hair salons to scam people out of money, especially around lunchtime. On the surface, it sounded eerily familiar. But the deeper investigators looked, the weaker the connection became. Hilton's known victims followed a very different pattern. They were typically hikers or people alone in remote wilderness areas. Patrice simply didn't fit that profile. In the end, authorities found no evidence directly linking Hilton to her disappearance. Another possible suspect had come and gone. Once again, the investigation returned to where it had started. If it wasn't Jeremy Jones, and it wasn't Gary Hilton, who was left? For many people following the case, only one name remained. As years passed, public attention increasingly turned toward Rob Andrews, Patrice's husband. When Netflix's Unsolved Mysteries featured Patrice's case, Rob agreed to be interviewed. Instead of easing suspicions, his comments left many viewers deeply unsettled. He openly discussed changing the locks on the family home less than a day after Patrice disappeared. Then he described something even more disturbing. After Patrice's remains were recovered, he requested that the funeral home arrange her bones in their proper anatomical position. According to Rob, he then picked up Patrice's skull, held it in his hands, and carried it around for a while. He later remarked that it was the last time he had seen Patrice anywhere near intact. The statement shocked many viewers. It wasn't simply what he said. It was the way he said it. For some, his words reflected overwhelming grief expressed in an unusual way. For others, they raised difficult questions that have never fully gone away. Although investigators publicly stated they had cleared Rob early in the investigation, his behavior has continued to fuel debate among true crime followers for years. And even today, the mystery surrounding Patrice Andrews remains one of Georgia's most haunting unsolved homicide cases. As the years passed, one person continued to draw attention. Not because of physical evidence, but because of the way he behaved. Patrice's husband, Rob, agreed to appear on Netflix's Unsolved Mysteries. What many expected to be a grieving husband's perspective quickly became one of the most talked about parts of the entire case. During the interview, Rob described visiting the funeral home after Patrice's remains were identified. He revealed that he picked up her skull and carried it around for a while, saying it was his way of saying goodbye. Then he made a statement that left many viewers stunned. That was the last time I saw Patrice anywhere close to being intact. For many people, those words felt deeply unsettling. Since Rob had left the room before the remains were put back together, viewers couldn't help but wonder what he meant. Was it simply an awkward choice of words? Or something more? Rob also speculated that Patrice may have been kidnapped and kept alive for a period of time before she was killed. While everyone processes grief differently, many found the way he discussed such horrifying possibilities unusually calm and detached, almost as if he were analyzing a criminal case instead of talking about his own wife. When questioned about it, Rob explained that he had studied criminology in college. He believed that background allowed him to think about violent crimes more logically. But for many viewers, his explanation only made his comments seem even more unusual. Then there was another decision that investigators, and the public, never forgot. Less than 24 hours after Patrice disappeared, Rob changed the locks on their home. The decision didn't just keep strangers out, it also locked out Patrice's teenage son, Pistol. If Patrice had somehow returned home alive, she wouldn't have been able to get inside her own house. When asked why he did it, Rob didn't deny it. He admitted that he simply didn't want Pistol living there because the two never got along. He described the teenager as a constant source of stress and said he wanted him gone. Many people found that explanation cold and heartbreaking. A frightened teenage boy had just lost his mother, yet instead of finding comfort at home, he was shut out only hours after she disappeared. Family members had long described the relationship between Rob and Pistol as tense. They claimed Rob was controlling and often seemed jealous of the close bond Patrice shared with her son. Those family tensions only fueled more suspicion after Patrice vanished. Rob also acknowledged that he kept Patrice's ashes instead of returning them to her family. Speaking during the interview, he said, "I'm protective of Patrice. I have her." The intensity of that statement unsettled many viewers, and public suspicion grew even stronger. Despite the public reaction, investigators repeatedly emphasized one important fact. They thoroughly investigated Rob early in the case. His gas receipt, workplace time records, and other evidence supported his alibi during the critical window when Patrice disappeared. Authorities also explored whether someone else could have acted on his behalf, but they found no evidence to support a murder-for-hire theory or any larger conspiracy. After the Netflix episode aired, many viewers questioned whether the documentary had intentionally made Rob appear suspicious. The producers responded by saying they edited hours of interviews into a single episode, but insisted his comments were presented honestly and reflected exactly how he spoke. To this day, Rob's behavior remains one of the most debated parts of Patrice Andrews' case. Some believe his unusual actions were simply the result of grief expressed in an unconventional way. Others believe his words and decisions raised questions that have never been fully answered. What everyone agrees on is this: even after all these years, the mystery surrounding Patrice Andrews has never truly been solved. Closest to Rob had finally returned Patrice's ashes to her family. After years of waiting, her loved ones were able to bring her home. But one important piece of evidence was still missing. Patrice's wedding ring has never been recovered. Investigators with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation released a detailed description of the ring, hoping someone, a pawn shop owner, a jeweler, or even someone who unknowingly received it as a gift, might recognize it. More than 2 decades later, that ring remains one of the case's biggest unanswered questions. As public interest in the case continued to grow, many people began revisiting Rob's behavior. Patrice's family had long believed he was controlling, and several relatives have publicly said they suspected he knew more than he admitted. Their suspicions were based largely on his actions and personality, not on physical evidence. If Patrice truly planned to leave the marriage, as several family members claimed, some have wondered whether Rob may have feared losing control of both his wife and his family. Those questions have fueled years of public speculation. Some people have also questioned Rob's unusual request at the funeral home, where he asked for Patrice's remains to be arranged anatomically before saying goodbye. To some, it appeared to be a husband's final farewell. Others have speculated whether he wanted to see if investigators had discovered anything that could reveal how she died. However, it's important to remember that these are public theories, not proven facts. Law enforcement has consistently maintained that Rob's alibi was supported by evidence. Investigators confirmed he had a gas receipt placing him in Woodstock around the time Patrice disappeared, along with workplace records showing he later reported for his shift. While some people have questioned whether those records could have been manipulated, authorities have never announced evidence supporting that possibility. Even so, some observers continue to ask whether investigators may be withholding information that has never been released publicly, a common practice in long-running cold cases. If additional evidence exists, law enforcement has chosen not to reveal it. Another unanswered question involves two witnesses who reported seeing a blue sedan outside Patrice's salon that day. One described seeing an older woman with someone believed to be Patrice, while another reported seeing a man nearby. Investigators have never publicly explained whether those sightings were connected to the crime. Because Patrice's salon sat along a busy highway, another possibility has never been ruled out. A stranger, or even a couple passing through, could have noticed that Patrice was alone and taken advantage of the opportunity. While investigators have considered that scenario, no evidence has conclusively identified who was responsible. Statistically, investigators often begin by looking at those closest to the victim. That's one reason Rob remained a focus of public discussion for years, even after police said they had cleared him. His unusual behavior, the strained marriage, and Patrice's reported plans for divorce have all continued to fuel debate. Still, suspicion alone is not proof. To this day, no one has been charged with Patrice Andrews' murder. The investigation remains officially unsolved, and authorities continue to keep key details confidential. More than 20 years later, one question still echoes through this case. Who really took Patrice Andrews, and why? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this documentary, don't forget to share, and subscribe for more in-depth true crime stories. We'll see you in the next investigation.